She's not coming today. She has some things to do. Okay, let me make sure the stream is working.
Hey Stephen, tomorrow's birthday is?
Who?
James Parsley.
Who's that?
He invented parsley. He's the one who invented part now. He's one of the clients from BBC. He's a staff member.
Okay, the stream works. Ed, can you come make sure the phones are okay?
Are you guys trying to lie to me and say?
No, he's a client and a staff member.
Hello, is anybody there? Participants, would you like to introduce yourselves on the phone?
I'm here.
Okay, and who are you? What's your name? Please
I'm sorry.
Would you please introduce yourself?
I'm Barbara Mitchell.
Okay.
Oh, good to see you called in.
It's the attorney.
Is there anybody else who is on the phone? I don't think there's anybody else.
Okay, with that, I think I'll begin. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this special interview courtesy of the Autistic Self-Advocacy Network of Sacramento. We have here today someone who is in charge of the Autism Advisory Task Force, so please welcome the task force chair and the director of the California Department of Managed Healthcare, Mr. Brent Barnhart. So, tell us in plain language what the task force is designed to do and what it focuses on.
The task force was created by the same legislation that passed last year dealing with the autism mandate. Bear in mind that until then, health plans were in many cases refusing to treat people with autism or diagnosed as having autism, particularly using such treatment and modalities as ABA. Along with that legislation, they created the task force to function within 2012, basically to report to the legislature and to the governor at the conclusion of 2012, literally the conclusion on December 31st, recommendations pertaining to specifically licensing of people to provide treatment for autism, to discuss different kinds of treatments that are evidence-based, and provide some kind of insight into what may be the best means of treating autism.
So, whose idea was SB Force in '96?
Well, it was the author. Who is a local senator here, Senator Darrell Steinberg. Now, I don't know beyond that. I mean, I hadn't discussed it personally with him, so I don't know the specifics of what he anticipated beyond what's actually in the bill.
So, who supported it and why?
Well, certainly all the parent advocates supported, particularly because they wanted the mandate, because they were angry that they couldn't get treatment that they thought was medically necessary for their children. So you had parent advocates, you had a lot of consumer advocates in general supporting the bill. And I would say also you had autism providers that were supporting it.
So tell us more about this autism mandate.
Okay, it's quite often when there is, if health plans, health insurers are required to provide a wide range of services in order to be in business as a condition of their license. That means that you have to go treat essentially anything determined to be an illness and to make available the appropriate treatment, the appropriate medicines for that, for a specific disease. But there are times when health plans will resist saying, well, we don't think that a given treatment is efficacious, We don't think it's really medically necessary based on scientific evidence, and therefore they refused to pay for it. So there was a big controversy going on between health plans, essentially the providers of care, the parents of kids with autism, as to what they should, whether or not the health plan shouldn't be required by law. That's the mandate, to provide a range of services, and among the services mentioned specifically was APA.
Now, did anyone oppose SB 4 life braces?
Yes, health plans.
Now, how come? Was it to cut costs or something like that?
Well, I'm sure cost would be a factor, but there is a significant difference of opinion, I think, as to the effectiveness of a number of different modalities, and the health plans argued, they were in the minority, as it turned out, in terms of the vote, but they argued that the bill should not pass because there was not sufficient scientific evidence to demonstrate the effectiveness of the various treatments that were being used, that are being used.
So do you think the task force is fulfilling the promises of this legislation?
Well, I mean, I think that there are going to be a series of recommendations. I think they are based on the best available knowledge we have now, because among the participants are a number of researchers as well as providers of care. I think that we've seen from the three health plan representatives, and bear in mind the legislation said there should be certain kinds of participants on the task force, and they include three representatives of health plans. And I think that there has been a fairly constructive discussion between the providers, the parents, and the consumers in general, and the researchers, as to what seems to make the most sense and what kind of care should be provided.
So tell us more about the task force's membership. So what different disciplines are chosen to be represented on the task force?
The disciplines that have been chosen include researchers, primarily people affiliated with universities, UCSF, UCLA, UC Santa Barbara, Stanford. It includes providers of care, and they include people that are actively providing care for kids with autism. It includes 4 representatives who are, we refer to as the parent advocates, including a representative from Autism Speaks, based in South Carolina, and 3 other parent advocates based here in California, 1 in Los Angeles, 1 here, 1 in the Bay Area, and 1 from Sacramento.
So what essential conflicts have been existing within the task force? Are there factions pitted against one another?
There certainly are differences of opinion. I do think there's been because it's a fairly small number of people, and they've met many times, so they've gotten to know each other as people, which I think is valuable. I think that there has been a bridging to a great extent of some of the divides that existed when they began talking. In other words, I think that they're communicating better. There are still areas where there are disputes. For example, there's a dispute right now which they're attempting to resolve about parent participation. Whether or not in the course of treating a child, it's also essential to have the parents part of and assisting in that treatment. I think everybody agrees that that's necessary, but the question is, there's a concern on the part of some of the parent advocates that a requirement that parents participate becomes a barrier if a given parent is unable, because of their work schedule, whatever, to participate. And then the fear that the health funds would then say, well, if the parent's not going to participate, we're not going to treat the kid. So that discussion is going on right now.
So what bridges had to be crossed, so to speak, for the task force to kind of come to its current state of situation?
well, cohesion probably is an overstatement, but let's say an amicable discussion of, what's appropriate. I think really it's a matter of human beings getting together and talking, trying to find some commonality. And it's a lot easier for someone to be outraged at somebody they don't know, or somebody they perceive to hold a set of beliefs that they don't agree with. When you bring people together and give them a chance to meet one another and to communicate, that's where I think you can establish some bridges. And by that I mean points at which people can meet and find some commonality. That doesn't mean they're going to agree on everything, but it does mean it gives them a chance to try to find some meeting in the minds.
So now for some hardball questions.
Oh, okay. Those were the easy ones.
Yes.
Okay.
Why were no autistics chosen to serve on the task force in spite of a national petition addressed directly to you with 259 supporters pushing for it?
I think that because initially nobody thought of it until we were petitioned, and until, of course, the task force had already been underway. I think that was a barrier. I do think there is something that the Autism Self-Awareness Network provides. It isn't being done by anybody else, and that is what I would call a genuine civil rights movement, which I think is something that does deserve some real attention. I mean, I'm thinking, for example, of your comments about that came up when one of the members of the committee brought up Sheldon from Big Bang Theory.
That's right.
And I think you provided some insight. It turned out you happened to be there and provided some insight as to how that might be taken. And nobody thought of that. And it made me think of not the Huxtables, it made me think of Amos and Andy. Everybody thought Amos and Andy was very funny. At least all white people do. When a couple of white guys would masquerade as two very dumb, bumbling black people.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, Sheldon's really funny until you think about it. So I guess that's what I mean by civil rights movement. It's not just a matter of trying to achieve goals, but it has to do with getting people to think about what what their perceptions are and whether they're valid or whether maybe they should explore better what their assumptions are. And I think that that's probably a valid role that could use some growth.
Mm-hmm. So who was responsible for the hiring decisions that made the task force what it is right now, what it was around the time we had the petition?
The hiring decisions, you mean in terms of the
Yes,
facilitator?
who decided who would be in the task force?
Oh, no, well, that was definitely us. That was our department.
Now, knowing, if you had known what you know now about the autistic civil rights movements and about other disability rights movements, would you have made the kind of hire that we were petitioning for?
I think if we'd done it early enough. Now, bear in mind that I've had to have, run it up the ladder. But I think it's something that, had I had a chance to do it over and start at the beginning, it would have been a worthwhile thing to pursue. I do think that there are, I think that there's a role which our task force has not really dealt with, and that is a great focus on treating young kids.
Yeah.
Without a whole lot of thought as to what happens when they're no longer kids.
That's actually a perfect segue into my next question. So why is there this focus on early intervention and the treatment of children in spite of the needs of a growing population of autistic adults, particularly in the realms of diagnosis and regional center accommodation?
Well, I mean, I think it's because the people who became who were activated by their concern were people who were concerned about their young kids. And I don't think, now, I do know of some of the parent advocates that they have now grown. Their young kids are now adults. So it's not as though nobody is aware of that, but I think there has just been not sufficient focus on, so what then? And that's what I guess I'm putting back to you. I think that this is the role that your network has, which is to make people focus and engage them in conversation, in discussions, in challenging them to say, oh, wait a minute, there's another whole aspect here is all these young kids are going to get, no longer, they're going to have 18, 19, 20 to become adults. What then?
So you mentioned we'll be taking audience questions during the second hour. So you mentioned having to go up the ladder to make certain hiring decisions. Who are you talking about? Who has these powers?
Oh, well, I'm part of administration. So that would mean up through
the DMHC.
Yeah, DMHC is part of a larger agency, which is the Health and Human Services Agency, and that agency is part of the governor's office. So that's the ladder I'm talking about.
So is this a state or federal organization?
It's all state.
So, why have the task force subcommittees convened outside of the public eye?
Because they wanted to have the most fruitful discussions they could have, and I think they felt that people would be, it would be worthwhile in work group discussions to have small groups, and they have been by and large small. They've been, 5 or 6 people at a time talking. Which frankly, I don't happen to disagree with that. I should mention, the task force is not governed by the Roth and Brown Act or by the Bagley-Keene Act in terms of public meetings. We try as much as possible to have the task force meetings open, but we have the legal authority to meet in smaller groups. And I think it's been valuable to do that because people will let down their hair more and talk more openly if they don't think every word they're saying is recorded. And I suspect you find that true too.
In some situations, when you're talking about autistic space, then yes.
Well, I wasn't thinking specifically about autistic space, but I was thinking about how humans react when they're thinking they're having a close coordination. Really, let's be honest. Let's open ourselves to honest discussion. And what I say is between you and me, or between you and me and a couple other people, as opposed to saying this is public, this is recorded, everything you say is being observed and recorded. People react differently.
So do you think that all the fruits of those discussions have come over into the public task force meeting, so that everybody who is observing is kind of on the same page as to what the whole discussion in its public and private parts is going?
I mean, if you're sitting in the audience observing what when they talk about, well, we developed this guideline. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's pretty honest because, quite frankly, what's laid out there is the product of a lot of discussion. And so, to the extent that there is not a resolution, or if there is a resolution, it's pretty clear what one is going.
So, how do you believe these recommendations will affect autistic adults?
I don't know that they will. Again, because the focus of the task force in the beginning has been on early intervention. What I'm saying is obviously there's a lot to be done, and I don't think that this task force, in its creation or in its evolution or its product, goes beyond that. Because I think that there's probably a lot of work to be done. And when we talk about adults, I think you really have to start with a whole new series of premises, and obviously trying to get some focus and some discussion and communication around those issues. Which first of all, I'm not an autism expert at any level. We're talking about treating kids, young kids, and early intervention, or whether we're talking about not just treatment, but just in terms of what are the needs of adults with autism, what might improve life for adults with autism. I don't know anything about that, and I think that it would, what you would want, and I have no idea, for example, whether the Mind Institute even focuses on that. If they do, that would be a good thing to learn.
Now, the Mind Institute happens to have a social group, I believe, for autistic adults.
Oh, they do? Okay. I didn't know.
So, much of the task force's work is about the certification of behavior analysts and other professionals who purport to help autistic people. Is it within the scope of the task force to push to include disability studies curricula into these certification programs? If not, how else can the voices of autistic adults and other adults with disabilities factor into the education and training of these professionals?
Is that a rhetorical question?
No.
But it sounds rhetorical. I mean, I understand your point. I think that it cannot. If it hasn't been factored into it, then it's not going to be addressed.
How come?
I'm not saying it shouldn't. I'm saying if in fact they've developed a whole series of modalities, not even considering disability issues of adults, then it seems unlikely that they will adequately address them. That doesn't mean they shouldn't be addressed. It seems to me, on the face of it, in a lot of sense, it could work.
So what could turn that around, you figure?
Well, I mean, I think you've got an important political role that has to be pursued, which is why I came here tonight. I think as I said, I consider this, I call it civil rights. I mean, I think it's probably beyond that. But I mean, I think it's something which genuinely has not yet been addressed and needs to be addressed.
In light of the murders of George Hodgins, Daniel Colby, and many more of our brothers and sisters, how has the task force handled the issue of preventing the abuse of autistics by their caretakers and therapists? How has the task force defined abuse as opposed to routine punishment?
It has actually, they have not talked about in terms of abuse, but they talked about restraints, for example. And I think it's a very, very tender subject. And particularly when you're talking about, large kids, for example. On the one hand, you don't want them to hurt themselves or hurt somebody else. On the other hand, there's something primitive and frightening and un-American about restraining anybody. So I think that there's some discussion of that, but I certainly don't purport to say that anything that the task force has come up with that is adequately addressing that, other than say this is an issue that takes a lot of focus and care.
Could the task force, address issues like these that have been brought up by the community of autistic people? Is there enough time to kind of bring that into consideration, or do you just have to kind of follow through with what you have now?
Yeah, I mean, I think we have to follow through with what we have now, because I do think, first of all, that there's some legitimate stuff there. I guess what I'm saying, or what I'm implying, is that there's a whole unaddressed. I mean, this is one task force in existence for a relatively short space of time, less than 1 year. That will go out of existence on on January the 1st of 2013. But there's a whole series of tasks that need to be addressed by somebody. and that there are opinion leaders that have participated in the task force. There have been politicians that have been involved in this. I'm thinking of the Insurance Commissioner, Dave Jones, Gerald Steinberg, Senator Steinberg from here in Sacramento, as another that I think ought to be, I think they'd like to engage in this conversation. Dr. Bismara, who works for Senator Steinberg, I mean, I think all of those people would be worth approaching and engaging in discussion. And I haven't asked them, by the way. That's suggesting that they may be a good place to start.
Sorry, I mean to bring it up, but
We'll field questions during the
I
second.
know I have to tell her something at the second hour that she put January 1st, she should have put 13 when she did the notes.
Okay, well, we'll take care of that.
Sorry.
These transcriptions like these do require a little bit of editing.
Yeah,
That'll come before the end.
I apologize. Go ahead.
That's okay. And for some of you, this is the first time you've had real-time captioning or card services, so there are little quirks you need to learn to pick up. Even though it's a very valuable service for those of us who have auditory processing disorders. Anyway, how has the task force taken public comments into consideration as they shape the final recommendations? Because I'm seeing a lot of comment, not just from our membership, but from a lot of parents, especially during the August meeting, and a lot of professionals from other organizations.
Well, there's a lot of different issues that come up. I mean, I think it's been a source of a lot of additional information that is valuable. And for example, one of the things that the mandate did, which was, I think, an unintended consequence, is that where you had a whole lot of patients who were being treated by the regional centers up and down the state, they can only treat people as the treater of last resort, meaning that they don't already have the coverage. So when you mandate that private health insurers have to provide coverage under their policies, that meant that their coverage is provided for, so the regional centers no longer are in the picture, because for anybody who has health coverage. Now, for people who don't have health coverage, people without it, regional centers can continue to treat patients for autism and autism spectrum disorders. But what that meant for a lot of families, the practical impact was where they had their child, say, going to a given regional center and getting treatment for a couple of years, 2-3 years, and all of a sudden now they're told, sorry, we can't help you anymore. You have to go to Blue Shield, you have to go to Kaiser. That meant no matter how good the services were that Blue Shield or Kaiser or Blue Cross may be providing, there's an incredible disruption in the lives of those kids and those parents. So, I mean, that's one thing we picked up from audience participation, because there were a lot of parents in that situation, just outraged, saying, why have you messed with what I have, what my child had? And now we've got to develop, she has to develop a relationship with a whole different treater, and also given the fact that when you're starting something up, it's going to take a while before it's done well. I mean, given all the health plans are, because we compelled them to by law, they're now starting to provide care, but actually getting the people in place who are well trained and are well supervised, and systems of keeping track of medical records and all of that actually tell you something, that takes a while to do. So again, if you look at those families, on the one hand, they had care, that's been severed, and now they get this new care, which maybe eventually will be as good, but probably not what they wanted.
So what happens to autistics that don't qualify for regional center services? Where are they supposed to go, and does the task force actually tackle that question?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think we tackled that question. I mean, the report isn't done yet, but then that's one of them. I mean, that's not, the problem is, I think in whether there are gaps. To the extent that kids can stay at regional centers, that means that they don't have private health insurance that's adequate to provide care. So they stay at the regional centers. And then you've got the kids who now have, under their private health insurance, new coverage, and eventually that would probably work out too. What you begin to worry about, though, is on the private health insurance side, you've got very large deductible policies in many cases, meaning that parents are having to pay an enormous amount out of pocket for the service. They're getting the services, but they have to pay for a lot of it in cash themselves. And if they don't have that kind of money, what do they do about that? Well, what is being discussed is maybe that's where the regional centers could fill in. In other words, somebody has to go and get coverage now from Blue Shield, but they would have to pay a very, very large deductible. If the regional centers could cover that deductible, that would be helpful. I mean, I think that's the kind of thing that the task force can address. We haven't done any of that yet, by the way. I'm projecting something that hasn't happened yet.
Could it happen in the span of the final task force meeting?
Oh, I mean, I think I'm talking about it would have to be finally tackled in the actual written recommendations.
I see. So to what ethical standards do task force members hold themselves in their operations?
Are you talking about them as individuals, because they all have different backgrounds?
Well, I mean in their task force operations.
Oh, well, I mean, I can only judge that on the basis of people I've gotten to know whom I didn't know before. How they conduct themselves, how much of themselves they put into the discussion. I mean, I've been pretty impressed with most of them. Now, we've had a couple of, I've not been able to make a lot of meetings, so I can't make judgments about most people, but of those who've been coming on a regular basis, remember, they're not getting paid for this. Their travel is covered, and we feed them the same box lunch every time. But they're not, I mean, it's not something where being a member of the task force brings you money and fame. It's just their own willingness to participate, and they've been doing that throughout the year.
But it's not as if they stand to gain from some of the new insurance policies that would be happening in the recommendations.
No. I mean, again, we're talking. It depends on who we're talking about. If we're talking about, I mean, I suppose you could argue that people who now gain employment as first-line treaters stand to gain from the mandate. On the other hand, they don't just get, it's not just like a job that they get for which they do no work. It's a substantial amount of work, and something that they need to be trained for and supervised and all that. But I mean, I don't know if anybody is making a lot of money off of this.
Yeah, there were some concerns, about potential conflicts of interest, but they were on pretty shaky evidence, so I didn't want to, just put that out there without, seeing what the evidence really was. I couldn't find anything. I think it seems that these guys are doing the best they can, given their perspectives.
I think that's right.
Yeah, it seems like it would be difficult to actually game the system to that end.
Yeah, and also
it seems like there would be a lot of systems of accountability to look for something like that, right?
Yeah, and I think at some point you have to take people for what you're at face value. Most of the people who have been involved in this are people that developed a real commitment to trying to deal with what they think is a major problem and a major social need. bucks doing that. They were just trying to somehow nudge the medical system towards meaningful treatment. Now, we won't know until it's really rolled out fully, was whether you start getting significant results that really shows that the approach they're taking is making a difference. But there's no doubt in my mind that these are people that are in the midst of this because they deeply believe that it can be.
Yeah, and though the community is rightfully angry at times, but it seems like most of the people in this business are doing the best they can.
That's my impression.
Yeah, although when we're looking and when we're trying to figure out these political realities, we're always looking at that. We're not really, we're looking at results because the intentions are good so constantly that some people either help or they don't. That's mostly what we're doing. So, who can we, the autistic community, contact to make recommendations separate from or alongside those of the task force? What powers do these health committees have?
Well, I think that I guess it's a question of what power does the legislature have. It does seem like you provide a perspective that has not been provided, or at least provided adequately. So I think it's worth talking to community leaders, politicians. You've got, for example, also in the Sacramento area, you've got Dr. Richard Pan, who's going to be the new chair of the Assembly Health Committee, who's going to have some significant impact on whatever directions the legislature takes. And somebody like that is a very thoughtful practitioner, a pediatrician. I don't know if he's ever has any training in autism or autism spectrum disorders, but he's a thoughtful guy who cares about his constituents and cares about fostering good practices and dealing with real social issues. So I think a guy like that is somebody worth talking to. Mentioned Senator Steinberg, certainly.
Yes, because it's Senator Steinberg and Governor Jerry Brown and I believe 2 health committees who are supposed to receive the recommendations that SB 946 mandate.
Right, and that's Senator Ed Hernandez in the Senate, who is now and will continue to be the chair of that committee, remains very much in the picture. And I mentioned Dr. Richard Pan, who's a pediatrician and happens to be from the Sacramento area, is the chair of the Assembly Health Committee.
So who have they been listening to on these issues and other disability issues?
Well, certainly Senator Steinberg has probably been the most engaged, and that would include the parent advocates I mentioned before, all of whom are on the task force, 4 of them, whom you know who they are. And then I mentioned Dr. Gizmara, who is actually employed by the Senate Rules Committee, meaning Senator Steinberg, who has been extensively involved in autism spectrum. By training, he's a cardiologist, but because of his own family issues, became very much involved in autism spectrum disorders and their treatment, and is heavily involved, not only involved with personally helped sponsor the Mindfulness Institute. So they're the people that I think of as people who really, one, care about these issues significantly, and 2, are very open to discussion, and I would urge you to talk to them.
Now remember, because we have this transcription, we'll be able to have a list of these names available once I get everything squared away on the internet.
Right, and these are all people who are public servants, and I think really are committed to dealing with issues, so I would urge you to talk to them. I think they'd be very open to talking.
That's fantastic. Well, that's all the questions I have. I would like to open the floor now to audience questions. Now, remember, as you come up with questions for Mr. Barnhart, note that, to the best of our knowledge, the task force's activities have nothing to do with funding cure-oriented neurological autism research with government money. So please remember to be civil and respectful as you ask your questions. Lex, go ahead.
You mentioned that you're just beginning an interest in the perspective of I fellow autistics. We are a very diverse group with many levels of both training and ability.
Mhm.
We represent a broad spectrum of our society. Do you see, to what degree are you willing to seek out what it's like to be an autistic under the spectrum of the task force? Because you're about to come to some very relevant decisions regarding us.
Well, I guess I'm been approaching from the standpoint that there's a whole range of things that the task force was not focused on, that I think you're raising. And I guess what I'm suggesting is it's not a matter, I think if the focus is on how can we get the task force to address these problems, I think we will fall flat on our face. Because we haven't been looking, we've been looking at, I wouldn't say it's narrow, but on the focus has been again on early intervention for young kids. And to the task, I think, that's appropriate and necessary is for a much larger discussion, saying we're not just talking about that community, we're talking about another whole community of people with a whole lot of, I'm assuming, a whole lot of needs and things that need to be given attention that this task force hasn't and isn't likely to address. So I guess what I'm saying is there needs to be discussions, dialogue, focus, and to get that, I think you need to raise awareness, but also urge some real thought and action in ways that the legislation that was passed last year and the task force itself do not address and haven't addressed yet.
It seems like that your perspective is one casual, fairly casual. I don't know that your members are involved in this community that would recognize some of the problems. For instance, I attended one of your the task force meetings, and you discussed who would be the what would be the level of training for people that actually came in contact with clients. And there was discussion about high school kids. And I found that kind of shocking because I could see these guys reporting back, to authority figures that would know very well what they're talking about, but not get the detail that needs to be gathered out in the field. Not get the details. I'm sorry?
That's already happening. High school kids are already working with the kids.
Yeah.
It's been going on for 30 years.
Yeah, and I don't know how we can expect the people in charge to be well informed by that kind of reporting.
Well, I think you raise a very good point. I mean, that's another point of dissension right now is what should be the level. And on the one hand, you've got, I think, by some of the task force members want to be sure that you got people really who are adequately trained and have an adequate background to be the first, the frontline caregivers. On the other hand, there's a significant fear on the part of a lot of the advocates that there will be insufficient numbers of trained people available, so you should make the bar not so high. And so they started off as saying, well, they should at least have a BA. And then somebody, well, maybe an associate degree from a community college. And then they started about high school kids. I do think that it would be worthwhile at our last meeting this week, which I know you're planning to come to, for you to articulate that point, or anyone here. I think that is a very pertinent point to be made, and maybe you can make it with authority that others cannot. Maybe I would consider that, because I do think this is something that has not been resolved. And I think you voiced it in a way that I haven't heard anybody voice it before.
To me, it's kind of an obvious thing. I mean, they're not going to be able to recognize what they're looking at. I mean, most people I know couldn't tell autism, they wouldn't know if they entered an autistic's home. They wouldn't know who was autistic. I mean,
I think that's true.
And they're going to be, we are going to be subject to their understanding.
Let me add some insight to that. Autistic people, particularly children, have already been subject to this understanding for 30 years. Basically, what you're looking at is the current model. The EIBT, early intensive behavioral treatment, was based primarily, exploded with the 1987 Lobos UCLA study. And that's what most of these programs are based on. And that study, the first-line providers were trained graduate students, and Lobos was the ultimate guide. Now, there's been several studies further on testing about, well, can we move the Lobos model into the community? So actually the standards for providers are no longer trained graduate students, but actually a little lower than that. And for the last 30 years, you didn't need anything but a high school diploma or a GED, and that's the current situation. So what I think a lot of these folks are going to say is that the research shows that we can provide these services with the Lobos's 50% success rate with the current qualifications of folks that we have.
And is it your perception that were not the case, if in fact that the standard was much higher? I mean, if you insisted upon a graduate level, so is it your perception that the success rate would be much higher?
In terms of the success rate, as success is being defined in the Lobos model as turning an autistic child into indistinguishable from his peers child, yes, I think there's no doubt. I've been working in that field for 7 years, and I know when I was in it that I was making terrible mistakes, ethical mistakes, and that the care is extremely low quality out of a lot of these companies. I'd be curious of actually looking at the success rate of the companies here in California, and are they actually even meeting Lobos's 50%? And all these research studies which say 50%. I mean, is that what's actually happening here in California? I'd be very surprised if that was the case. But I'm also not necessarily saying that the definition of success as, removing a child's diagnosis is the correct definition of success.
Have you ever heard of Fragile X?
No, I'm sorry.
It's a diagnosis that trying to think. It's a diagnosis that they have not enough. The chromosomes could be a little bit off, but and then sometimes they read things in their minds, and then that, like Steve and I, um, we watched a movie called Mission to Mars. It's about a fellow that is from England, and then and his goal was a mission was that he wanted to go meet Lars from Metallica. Lars is just gonna say that was spelled wrong. Sorry about that. I want to
Okay.
fix it. But
Remember,
anyways,
the typos we'll get later once we get back to the
well, what it means is that they traveled. He traveled with was his name was Tom, so he traveled with Kate, his brother Will, all the way to Los Angeles, and then he tried to go to the concert down in Las Vegas, but he didn't get to go because he heard some, you know. But what it means is that he was, I guess he was afraid to go. He's like afraid of large crowds and things like that. And then in the um, second stop that he went was Sacramento. So he went to the UC Davis Mine Institute and talked to Dr. Randy Hagerman. No, you spelled that wrong. Yeah, yeah, that's right. So you gotta spell that with an I. So next time when you re-edit, fix that too. Anyways, so anyways, he spoke to her and with his sister Kate, and with his brother Will. Um, so they met and talked about what kind of researches and whatever with
Fragile X.
Fragile X. So, and then we thought it was so fascinating because we saw the part, and then he tried to go to the concert again, but I guess he was, couldn't go this time. But it was in Sacramento it was at Art Arena, but now it's Power Bound Pavilion. And then, so he didn't get to go this time. So finally, when he went to Anaheim, he finally got to see the concert, and he did his mission. The goal that he wanted to do is to meet Lars, and then so he went to go see Lars, and then he was like, he went to the concert and he wasn't afraid, and that's one of the reasons of having autism and fragile X. Like they hear the noise, and then they just are kind of afraid.
Yeah, I mean, autism and Fragile X are similar in a lot of ways. They have a lot, just looking at the scientific part of it, they have a lot of the same symptoms. And looking at the sociological part of it, you see, I know at least one person with Fragile X. And, she's a big community activist. So yeah, we're definitely commingling with people with
By the
Fragile
way,
X.
when I saw that movie, that was back on August 8th, 2012.
Fragile X is um, genetic. It is the
Yes, it could be genetic.
it is the most out of what we know that causes autism. Out of the genetic causes, it is the most common genetic cause of autism that we are aware of. It accounts for a certain percentage of, I can't recall exactly, of autism, and it's we know it accounts for it, and out of all the genetic causes, it's the one that we know accounts for the largest.
So that's one of the things that we do at the mine, and then there's other things like we have the early, the AR, whatever AR or whatever whatever they call it. So we do that kind of, and then we do other resources like Tourette, and then we have congestive, I don't think what was it again, brain, whatever they call it, so over at the mine. So it's like we do all kinds of different researches at the UC Davis Mine Institute here in Sacramento. So that's where I work, and I work at the SAD means